All right. Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa ashabihi wa man tabi'ahum bi ihsanin ila yawmiddin wa ba'd. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. The last time we were together with this particular book, Mukhtasar Minhaj al-Qasidin, we were talking about the destructive nature of overeating, satiation, if you will. And tonight we're going to finish off this chapter, because this chapter is like Kasru Shahwatain, which is Shahwat al-Batan wal-Farj, which basically means the appetite, both food and sensual desire. So this next topic has to do with sensual desire. And so the Imam Rahimahullah Ta'ala, he says basically that the desire for sensual pleasure, it's known as Shahwat al-Farj. Farj is talking about your private region. He says you should be aware that the desire to be intimate has overcome mankind, or has some type of authority or gained some type of power over mankind for two reasons. There are two beneficial reasons to this. The first one he mentions is baqa' an-nasl, and that is basically to have kids and to continue the human race. That's the first one. And the second one he mentions is that so that one might understand pleasure, by which they can use as a measuring stick or a yardstick of sorts to grasp the pleasures of the hereafter. We need to understand it's not the same thing, but to give you an idea of what pleasure is, so that when you read about the pleasure of the hereafter or the joy and the happiness of the hereafter, you have some concept of it. Because basically what you do not understand, the kind of the category of something or the general understanding of something, if you don't understand based on experiencing it, then you won't have a craving for it. You won't have a desire to have that thing. If you haven't experienced something, at least the general concept of something, then you won't have a desire to obtain it. Unless, of course, talking about shahwa, we're talking about this desire. It could help achieve this, right? It could be a motivating factor, unless it's not managed properly and brought into balance. Because if you don't bring it into balance, it can lead to numerous afflictions. It can lead to disaster, tribulations. So he says if it wasn't for that, women would not be considered the snares of shaitan. And we're going to talk about that in some greater detail. So while there are wondrous benefits to fulfilling your sensual, sexual desires, fulfilling them can lead to destruction of one's worldly life, as well as the destruction of one's religion. And so to actualize the benefits, the two benefits that we mentioned there, which is baqa' an-nasl, which basically means to continue on the human race, as well as to have some concept of pleasure in order to be motivated towards achieving that in the hereafter. In order to actualize those benefits and avoid the harms, the urge that we have to fulfill those sensual desires, it has to be managed and fulfilled in a moderate way. Al-i'tidal is what we're looking for, as he says, is to have a moderate and balanced way. Because we have to first understand that it's very dangerous. And to illustrate the dangerous nature And sometimes in the uncontrollable nature of that sensual desire, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, رَبَّنَا وَلَا تُحَمِّلْنَا مَا لَا طَاقَةَ لَنَا بِهِ. This is Surah Al-Baqarah. Many of you would recognize this is the last verse in Surah Al-Baqarah, a portion of it which means, "O Lord, do not burden us with what we cannot bear." Do not burden us with what we cannot bear. Some of the scholars of the Quran said that this verse is referring to excessive sexual desire. What we couldn't bear is like what they would classify today as nymphomania, which it's like a psychological disorder where a person is a nymphomaniac, meaning they can't get enough of sexual fulfillment. So that's what some of the scholars of the Quran had said, that this is what that means. There's a more general understanding of the verse, however, some have narrowed it down to mean this very thing. That we're asking Allah, do not burden us with that which we could not handle, which means to be overwhelmed with the need to fulfill sensual desires. And so it's something that we should seek refuge in. Seek refuge in Allah from such a burden. And we can see from another report of tafsir for the verse, وَمِن شَرِّ غَاسِقٍ إِذَا وَقَبْ. This is Surah Al-Falaq. Most of us have memorized this like we've committed the last verse of Surah Al-Baqarah to memory. This is verse number 3 of Surah Al-Falaq, chapter 113. The translation of it is based on the most obvious explanation of this verse, which is, and from the evil of night. So we began, قُلْ أَعُوذُ بِرَبِّ الْفَلَقِ, right? And say, I seek refuge from the Lord of Al-Falaq. And then, second verse, and the third verse comes here, and the third verse means that we seek refuge from the evil of night when it is at its darkest, or when it becomes dark. So that translation reflects the well-known explanation of Ibn Abbas, radiyallahu anhu. There is, however, another explanation which has been reported from Ibn Abbas, and he says that the verse is referring to a man's arousal. If you understand what I'm saying. That we seek refuge from that arousal. Sexual arousal, of course. And so the Prophet ﷺ, you find, this is a secondary narration from Ibn Abbas. However, if that's not the preponderant view, you can see the Prophet ﷺ did seek refuge from similar things. He says, قُلْ Allahumma. So he taught somebody, say, Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min sharri sam'i, wa min sharri basri, wa min sharri lisani, wa sharri qalbi, wa sharri maniyyi. Do you recognize that verse? I mean that word. So here it says, O Allah, he says, say, O Allah, I seek refuge in thee from the evil of what I hear, min sharri sam'i, from the evil of what I hear, wa min sharri basri, and from the evil of what I see, wa min sharri lisani, and from the evil of what I say, like he says lisan, which means the tongue, but it's talking about the act of speaking, okay? Wa min sharri qalbi, and from the evil of what is in my heart, or what I think about, wa min sharri maniyyi, and from the evil, which we could say, arises from sexual passion. That's how you could understand the meaning. This is found in Sunnah Abi Dawud, Tirmidhi, wa Nasa'i. So this is a very widespread and transmitted hadith. So here the Prophet ﷺ seeking refuge from that, the evil of sensual desire and sexual passion. Some of the people of the past, they said that when a man is aroused, he loses a third of his wit. When he becomes sexually aroused, a third of his wit is gone. And if you're a man, you don't need to research that. It might be more than a third sometimes. It might be half, if not all of your wit may be lost depending on the strength of that arousal. Some have added to that particular narration when they said a third of his wit is lost, they said as well as a third of his religion is lost. So it's something which is very, very dangerous. And so here the Imam is talking about some of the dangers if it's not balanced and kept moderate. Okay, he goes on and he mentions in a hadith, the Prophet ﷺ said, ما تركت في الناس بعدي فتنة أضر على الرجال من النساء. He says, I haven't left a tribulation among the people more harmful to men than women. More harmful to men than women. So here I think it's important to note, there's a very important kind of understanding to this. So obviously we can see that it's dangerous. He mentions that there's a dharar, there's some type of harm that you find in this relationship between men and women, and it's talking about the harm that sexual desire can lend itself to. So this is a very dangerous thing. The Prophet ﷺ also highlighted this in a hadith. He says, "Ash-shababu shu'batun min al-junun." Youth is a branch of insanity. Shabab shu'batun min al-junun. And I think you got to keep this in mind when dealing with youngsters. Sometimes we're like, they don't even know what they're talking about. They don't know what they're saying. They got no idea. They're saying crazy things. That's because shabab, that's what they do. They are a little like, it's not fully there. Then he said, وَالنِّسَاءُ حِبَارَةُ الشَّيَاطِينِ, or حِبَارَةُ الشَّيْطَانِ, that the women are snares of shaitan. And in this hadith I just mentioned, which was mentioned by the Imam, مَا تَرَكْتُ بَعْدِ مِنَ فِي النَّاسِ فِتْنَةً أَضَرَّ عَلَى الرِّجَالِ مِنَ النِّسَاءِ. I have not left a more harmful temptation for mankind than the temptation women pose for men. I think it's a better translation. Right? A more harmful temptation than the temptation women pose for men. This is found in Sahih Muslim, by the way. So this is an authentic narration. And the narration is alluding to, it's not alluding to an inherent evil of women. That's important to note. It's not saying that women are inherently evil. We don't believe that as men. We shouldn't have this view that women are bad or they're evil. Otherwise, we've married evil things, and our wives have evil female children, our daughters who we love. That's not what we should understand from this particular hadith or similar hadith to this. What we do need to understand, what the hadith is alluding to, is that there is an extremely powerful sexual temptation that men experience from women as a reaction to a woman. For a man just seeing a woman, there is a reaction that happens, and sometimes a very powerful reaction to the point that a third of his wit is lost. Just the sight of a woman can be tempting to a man. So this hadith that I mentioned indicates a very strong, innate attraction that men have for women. That's how we should understand the connection between the two. There's a very strong, innate attraction that men have for women. And the temptation has a powerful, controlling, almost dominating effect over men if left unmanaged. And so the Prophet ﷺ described women as being snares of shaitan, meaning that shaitan uses women. Again, not that women are shayateen. There may be some women that are shayateen, there's no doubt, just like there may be some men that are shayateen. But not that they are shayateen in and of themselves, but shaitan would use them as a device, as a tool, like a snare is a device. The snare isn't out to catch things for itself. The snare is a tool that someone sets to catch that thing. So shaitan will use that very powerful attraction that men have to women, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put in them for these two reasons we said, بقاء النسل, procreate, and to have some experience of pleasure in this life, to kind of understand the concept of it in the next. But shaitan will use that as a snare in order to catch, if you will. So a woman doesn't have to actively or intentionally try and trap a man. A woman doesn't have to actively or intentionally do that, because the shaitan's going to do a lot of that work for her. Even though there are some women that actively and intentionally try and trap men, that is a real thing. She doesn't even have to do that because shaitan's going to make that happen regardless. And so, if she's not intentionally and actively trying to snare a man, then shaitan is doing it and using that woman as the snare. She's being used by shaitan. And this is done so that shaitan can bring about man's downfall and the destruction of his faith and his religion, along with hers in the process. So the Prophet ﷺ, describing this, he says, إِنَّ الْمَرْأَةَ تُقْبِلُ فِي صُورَةِ الشَّيْطَانِ وَتُدْبِرُ فِي صُورَةِ الشَّيْطَانِ. That the woman comes and goes in the image of shaitan. فَإِذَا أَبْصَرَ أَحَدُكُمْ امْرَأَةً فَلْيَأْتِ أَهْلَهُ فَإِنَّ ذَلِكَ يَرُدُّ مَا فِي نَفْسِهِ. He says, if any one of you were to see a woman, then let them go to their wife. Meaning to go fulfill that desire that has been born inside of their heart or their mind for that woman that he perhaps saw. He can go to his wife, and that would remove or expel or repel the feelings that he had. This is a hadith in Sahih Muslim. This hadith, إِنَّ الْمَرْأَةَ تُقْبِلَ فِي صُورَةِ الشَّيْطَانِ وَتُدْبِرُ تُقْبِلُ فِي صُورَةِ الشَّيْطَانِ وَتُدْبِرُ فِي صُورَةِ الشَّيْطَانِ. So here it's saying that the woman comes and goes in the form of shaitan. So now, how do we understand that? You said that women aren't inherently evil. Now we're saying women are shayateen. I said that before. They're not necessarily. They could be, but not necessarily. So to understand, there's a number of scholars that have commented on this particular hadith. One of them being Imam al-Qurtubi rahimahullah ta'ala. We've talked to him, we've referred to him on numerous occasions, especially when it comes to the Quran. He says, the hadith, indeed, a woman comes and goes in the form of shaitan. That is, in her quality of whispering and stimulating desire. And this is evident in the appealing qualities that provoke sensual desire and natural inclination that she possesses. A woman possesses these qualities that are inherently attractive to men. It's important to note, men aren't attracted to shaitan. There's nothing inherently beautiful or appealing about shaitan to a man. But there is in a woman. Why is that? It's unexplainable. It's just there. Right? Why are you attracted to women? I don't know. As opposed to trees, for example. That's just the way Allah created us. So here, it's evident from the qualities that they possess and the reaction that men have from that there's this appeal. And so, through those qualities, she's inviting to temptation, which Imam al-Qurtubi says is greater than the temptation of shaitan. The temptation that a man has for a woman, as I kind of expressed, is greater than the temptation the shaitan can produce on his own. And so for this reason, the Prophet ﷺ said, I have not left in my ummah a temptation more harmful to men than women. The temptation that a man has for a woman is more harmful to him, potentially, than what shaitan has intrinsically within himself. So when the Prophet ﷺ feared this corruption for his ummah, he then guided them to a path which they could avoid that corruption and resolve the problem. He says, when one of you sees a woman as is impressed by her, let him go to his wife. And so by doing this, he gave us a route of escape. Go to your wife, and the benefits of this going to your wife is it will repel what you have experienced, the feelings that you have or the arousal that you have. Ibn al-Jawzi rahimahullah ta'ala, he says, indeed, shaitan beautifies her and incites to her. Now this is something that the shaitan is going to do to her. The inclination of the onlooker towards her strengthens according to the intensity of his desire. Right? And there are some men that have more sensual desire than others. And so the greater their desire is, the stronger the appeal will be, the stronger the inclination to her will be, and the more susceptible he will be to those types of whispers. So then he says when he engages with his family, meaning sexually engages with his wife, that stimulus diminishes and weakens. Now, we don't have to focus on that person. I've, managed to take care of that desire. And there is a replacement, which is a halal replacement. That is the relationship that you have with your wife. Imam al-Nawawi rahimahullah ta'ala, great Imam. Of course, this is hadith from Sahih Muslim, and so he has a commentary on that. He said that this indicates a reference to desire and an invitation to temptation, meaning the hadith that the woman comes and goes in the form of shaitan. It's talking about there's a desire and an invitation to temptation, because that's basically what shaitan does. He wants to fuel the desires within mankind, and he wants to tempt them. He wants to invite them to act on those impulses. These are the things that Allah has placed in the hearts of men in terms of inclination towards women. He says, simply delighting at seeing them. The delight in looking at a woman is number one. And he says, and everything else related to them, man has some inclination towards. Some softness there that you wouldn't find when a man's looking at another man or talking or dealing with another man or interacting or exchanging or at work or outside or at the gas station, or doesn't matter, fixing a tire. There's grease on her hands, there's mud, it's just not the same thing. And oddly enough, only a man understands that. If you told this to a woman, she'd go, no, I don't believe that. I don't understand that. That doesn't make any sense. That's not true. That's not right. That's not possible. Like, well, you're not a man, so you don't understand. Yeah, so anyway, this is what he says. Everything related to her the man has some inclination towards. And so he says, she is similar to shaitan in his call to evil through his whispers and adornment, meaning the power that shaitan can have over, I should say the influence that shaitan can have over mankind. A woman can have a very powerful influence over a man by way of this temptation. And so from the hadith, it can be inferred, we can understand, he says, from this, that she should not go among men except out of necessity. It's also fitting for a man to lower his gaze from her and completely turn away. Again, we shouldn't understand that women are intrinsically evil, but that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created us in a manner such that men are attracted to women in a very physical way, which can be almost, if not, intoxicating. And the attraction, it has great benefits. And those benefits, again, I mentioned. But this attraction also possesses profoundly negative outcomes if it's not managed. So we have to do our part, as described in our legal code, to avoid sustaining heavy losses by fulfilling that desire in the wrong way. And from the means that are highlighted in our legal code is to avoid interaction with the opposite gender unless deemed required to do so, and to absolutely refrain from being alone together, a man and a woman. These are just some of the avenues by which a person can avoid falling into destruction. The Prophet ﷺ, he says, لا يخلون رجل بامرأة إلا معها ومعها ذو محرم. He says that no man should be alone with a woman except that there is a mahram with her. إلا ومعها ذو محرم. There has to be a mahram that's present there. Her mahram, of course, should be present. That's if it's two. And that's just one of the hadith. You find this is in Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim. And the reason that you need that third party there is because as strong as you might be, the temptation can overcome the strongest of men. The most pious of men can be overwhelmed by that. Some of the righteous, he says here in the book, he says, if I were entrusted by a man with Beit al-Mal, like the treasury, like all the money, community treasure. If I was entrusted with that, I think that I would be able to fulfill my trust. But if I was entrusted with a dark-skinned woman to be alone with her for 1 hour, I don't trust myself to be with her. There's a couple of things to note here. Obviously, the difference between, we understand the power and temptation of money. You know, for many of us, it's obviously an important part of our lives. We spend a great deal of time working to earn money, to make money. We want to make more money. We want to be able to spend that money in good ways to bring about some avenues of relief, happiness, and joy. So that's a big thing. And so the comparison here is something that everyone can understand. That the righteous person feels they would be okay watching after money, but not okay having to deal with a woman, an attractive woman. He says here a dark-skinned woman, and that's something to note, that there was an attraction traditionally for a dark-skinned woman. You find Ibn al-Jawzi actually wrote a book, Tanwir al-Ghabash fi Fadl al-Sudan wal-Habash. He wrote a book about the virtues. It's like enlightening the darkness, if you will, revolving the virtues of Habash, you know, is like the Habasha, which is like a reference to Abyssinia. And Sudan, of course, is talking about dark skin, like black people. So he authored a book about the virtues of you know, dark-skinned people, black people, and talked about, is an entire chapter. I think this book's been translated into English. There's a chapter about, and I was gonna use this at some point, but it takes some real maturity to read through the book, because it talks about this type of attraction and so on and so forth. So if you're interested, I think the book's translated in Ibn al-Jawzi. You can find it available probably online. I think I have the translation in my office. Yeah, so anyway, somebody that you're attracted to, you know, to be able to contain or maintain and contain yourself, control yourself, even the most pious of people can fall in such a situation. So the Prophet ﷺ, as is noted here by the Imam, he says that a man should not be alone with a woman because the third of those two is shaitan. He says, لا يخلو رجل بامرأة فإن ثالثهما شيطان. Right? The third of the two is shaitan. And of course we understand shaitan is there to fuel the flames of this type of impulse that a person were to fall into sin. So, I think it's important also to note that according to the great Imams, and if you're more interested in the topic, if you look at Ihya Ulumuddin by Imam al-Ghazali, you can find, because that's what this is based on, you can find a lot more written about this, some more details of this particular topic. But from that, it's noted that this desire is considered to be the strongest desire. And to fulfill one's sensual desires is the strongest desire, and it can be sought after in three different ways. A person can fulfill this desire in it's like three levels, if you will. So the first level is to be negligent, to fulfill it with neglect. And the neglect would be a person who's married, a man, let's talk about a man who's married, but doesn't fulfill the desire for intimacy in a satisfactory way for his wife. Right? Basically, leaving her exposed to also heavy, because women also have sensual, they have the desires, leaving her unfulfilled. So he's neglected that part as a husband, so that now she's left wanting, and which may lead her to seek that fulfillment elsewhere. That's neglect. And that is a reason for a man not to get married. If a man does not have the desire does not have the the desire for intimacy, then it's a reason for him to not get married. And some may argue that in that case, it's better that you don't get married. Because marriage is of various different rulings. Is it haram? Is it makruh? Is it mubah? Is it mustahab? Or is it wajib? It depends on the person's situation. And here, if a man is unable to fulfill the intimate needs of his spouse because it's just not in him for whatever reason, then it's probably better that he didn't get married in the first place. And then, of course, he can focus on other things, getting closer to Allah through worship or through learning knowledge of Islam, etc. There are plenty of things that a person could do. And if a person was actually on the path to becoming a spiritual master or a scholar in Islam, the pious, they recommend that you didn't get married. If you could control yourself and restrain those desires by, they said, jur', by being hungry, like fasting, of course, which is what the Prophet ﷺ prescribed, then you should do that so that you can pursue the spiritual path that you're on. Because once, they noted, once you get married, the person that gets married, once they're married, they're never the same after that. Once you get married, you're never the same. So your life has changed because now they said, you become strapped to the dunya. You become strapped to the world because as a man in Islam, what's your job now as a husband? You have to be a provider. You have to be a protector. You have to be a leader. You have to be a caretaker. You're going to have children. Now you have to be responsible for kids. And so now your life's changed. And so the opportunities become less and less the more responsibility that you have of this world. The opportunities for you to pursue a purely spiritual life is now lessened and diminished. Unless, of course, you're a person that can't handle being single and is easily tempted, can't lower your gaze, can't control your thoughts, can't manage your chastity. And so in that case, it would, of course, be better for you to get married and to have the halal option available to you. So that is one side. That's talking about the neglect, which if you were to get married, then that leads to moderation. So moderation in fulfilling your sexual desires is one in which it quells, if you will, the desire to the degree that now you're able to refrain from, being tempted by others. And in the event that you are, then you need to go and handle that. And that you're also fulfilling the basic rights of your spouse. That's moderation, which, if not careful, can lead to excessiveness. And excessiveness means that you are overwhelmed and overcome with sensuality to the point that it's always on your mind. And so that's what the Imam here, he says. So in this particular mukhtasar, the summary, he doesn't mention the negligence and the balanced, moderate view. He goes straight to excessiveness because this is where the dangers lie. Most of the dangers lie in being excessive. Like we talked about excessive eating and the dangers of that. Now we're talking about some of the excesses when it comes to sensual desires. And he says here that the excessiveness in sensuality, it ends up to the point, basically, the extreme, that a man is so overwhelmed with that all of his thoughts, his aspirations are now tied to fulfilling that desire. I just want to have sex all the time. That's what his goal is. I just want to be, getting busy morning, noon, and night. So he becomes distracted from thinking about the hereafter because all he's thinking about is enjoyment in this world. And that could lead to him falling into illicit behavior, to lewdness. All right, so that happens in a couple of ways. Right? If a person approaches this desire in an excessive manner, it can overcome the mind, as I said, prevent you from treading the path to the hereafter, the path to paradise. It can overpower you from practicing your faith to the degree that that desire will lead you to illicit behavior. And that illicit behavior occurs in one of two ways. The first is through fornication or adultery if you're married, right? Because you could be married and you're being so excessive in this, like what they would describe as an nymphomaniac. You just can't get enough. You become so excessive as a married person that you end up going outside of your marriage because you can't get enough with your spouse. Right? It could be that you're just, your spouse just can't keep up with the demand. And so you go outside of the marriage in order to fulfill that. So that's being excessive as a married person. Otherwise, you're fornicating, meaning you're not even married, you're just going and hooking up. So this is the first of the two ways. The second is through homosexuality. To fulfill a sensual desire, you now go to the LGBT situation. So the first in the Quran, fornication has been, this is to understand the dangerous nature of fornication. It's been associated in the Quran with committing shirk as well as taking a life without just cause. Right? So imagine, the gravest sin is to commit shirk, to associate partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then one of the major sins is to take a life wrongfully. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, وَالَّذِينَ لَا يَدْعُونَ مَعَ اللَّهِ إِلَهًا آخَرَ وَلَا يَقْتُلُونَ النَّفْسَ الَّتِي حَرَّمَ اللَّهُ إِلَّا بِالْحَقِّ وَلَا يَزْنُونَ. It says, and those who do not invoke with Allah another deity or kill a soul which Allah has forbidden except by right, and do not commit unlawful sexual intercourse. He says, وَلَا يَزْنُونَ وَمَنْ يَفْعَلْ ذَلِكَ يَلْقَى أَثَامًا. But whoever should do that will meet a terrible penalty. This is Surah Al-Furqan, chapter 25, verse number 68. So here you can see the dangerous nature, the destructive nature of it, as it's coupled with these major sins, shirk and murder. Homosexuality is considered worse than that. It's worse than fornication. Because not only is it impermissible, but it's a wasted effort. Fornication is impermissible, right? But it's carried out in the way that it was prescribed for you to, at least like the mechanical part. The mechanical part of it is that a man is sleeping with a woman. And so the seed of the man is planted, fil harth, right, in the womb of the woman. That's how it's been designed. The seed is planted in a fertile field. As for those who try and relieve this or pursue this desire through homosexuality, it's like those who destroy crops and the fertile field. And we could say, destroy progeny. It's similar to what Allah says in Surah Al-Baqarah, وَيُهْلِكُ الْحَرْثَ وَالنَّسْلَ. Surah Al-Baqarah, this is chapter 2, verse number 205, and the verse means, and they destroy al-harth and nasl. And in the context of the verse, it means they destroy crops and cattle. But harth in the Quran also refers to the womb, because it's like a fertile field. And nasl refers to progeny, your offspring. And that's one of the fundamental primary objectives of the Islamic code is hifd al-nasl, right? Is to preserve the family ties, lineage. So homosexuality seeks to destroy both, like abandoning procreation and cutting off ties of kin, essentially. And so for that reason, it's been described in the Quran as a form of transgression. He says, إِنَّكُمْ لَتَأْتُونَ الرِّجَالَ شَهْوَةً مِّن دُونَ النِّسَاءِ بَلْ أَنْتُمْ قَوْمٌ مُسْرِفُونَ. We said it was a wasted effort. Right? So here's a wasted effort. Right? He says, indeed, you approach men with lust instead of women, you were certainly transgressors. Surah Al-A'raf, verse number 81. Verse number 81. So that gives you an idea of the two different ways that this type of destruction can occur, either through promiscuity or through homosexuality. And then what ends up happening is a person is led to ishq, which is like a person being love drunk, if you will. It's like passionately drunk on something, which is a bad quality to have. And he considered huwa aqbahu shahawat. It's the most despicable of desires. And so if it reaches this level of ishq, the person is likely to behave in a very animalistic way. If your desire for sensual pleasure reaches the level of ishq, you're likely to behave in an animalistic manner, meaning you'll seek to fulfill that desire whenever and wherever possible. Whenever and wherever. So now you like talking about what you might see in popular culture. You're going to fulfill that desire on the airplane, the Mile High Club, on the beach, in the public restroom, out in the park. It doesn't matter the time of day. You're in public because your level of craving has reached this degree where now, like an animal is going to do that right out there. They're not caring. They're just it's animalistic. The animal, the female animal is in heat. The male animal is instinctually going to go and try and do his thing. It don't matter who's watching, where they're at, it's going to happen. And this is how humiliating this level of craving can be. So he says that's why it's aqbah shahwat, right? The most despised or the most foul of desires here. And it's most deserving of being shied away from. He says many people, they fall into this ishq or this love drunkenness with money or with position or power or with playing dice or with chess. Right? You find people that like just become obsessed with these things, or playing the drum. This is the drum he's talking about. They used to have the little tambourine on it, little things on there. These types of things. And so it ends up these things overcome the heart, and they're unable to be patient with them. And so that's something that you have to keep in mind. This, of course, we're talking about going to the extremes here when it comes to fulfilling your sensual desires. And so he ends here with kind of a conclusion, and that is, it's best or it's easiest to avoid these things at the very beginning, to take proactive steps to avoiding that, as opposed to letting it build and develop and grow to now you have a real problem on your hand. It's better to like nip it in the bud from the jump. Just cut it off from the very beginning. Because when you're at the end of it and it's become so overwhelming, the cure is like extreme. I mean, you know, it's like it could be near impossible for people. He says it could likely fail. It might not cure you because you're too far gone. It's basically saying, like, think about an animal that you're trying to lead, and it wants to go through a door. He says it's easier to direct the animal away from the door than it is for the animal to enter into it. Now you got to get it to come back out, basically. So if you don't want them to go into this area, you got to lead the animal away from that area. You don't let the animal go inside that area, then now try and pull the animal back out. So that's what it is. It's a big animal. That the sensual desire, that the lust that we have, the temptation that we have, mainly for men, it's also for women, is you got to take control of that from the very beginning and lead that in the direction which is going to be helpful, not harmful. The helpful temptation, obviously, is going to be through marriage, approaching it through its proper avenues in a moderate way. And the harmful way is let it go right through that door. Just break right on through it. That's through fornication or homosexuality or adultery or excessiveness, or we could say even perhaps negligence in some cases. So that's the key here, is to manage this temptation. Much like you would manage your food intake, your diet, you have to control your sexual appetite as well, so that you don't end up missing out on whatever benefit that it has. We talked about the benefits of this life, and of course the benefits that it can come with in the hereafter. And that's where we'll wrap up for this evening. Jazakallah khair. Sallallahu alaihi wa sallam ala nabiyyina Muhammad.